The chandeliers of Ashbourne Hall sparkled like captive stars, their golden light reflecting off hundreds of crystal prisms. The grand ballroom had been prepared with such fastidiousness that even the Queen herself would have found no fault. Silk draperies of deep emerald hung along the walls, matching the livery of the footmen, while the polished marble floors shone like liquid ivory. The scent of beeswax candles mingled with the faint sweetness of roses, carried on a gentle winter breeze that slipped through the half-opened windows. It was the beginning of London's winter season, and with it came the most anticipated event of the year, the Duchess of Harrowden's annual ball. Lords and ladies from every corner of the kingdom had arrived in their finest attire. Jewels glittered at throats and wrists, feathers trembled atop elaborate coiffures, and the air hummed with gossip that was as dangerous as it was delicious. Among the assembled guests, the name that caused the most fervent whispers was Alexander, Duke of Greystone. He was a man rarely seen at social functions since the passing of his father 3 years prior. His reputation was built on cold efficiency, impeccable propriety, and a demeanor so reserved that even the boldest debutantes found their courage falter in his presence. When his carriage was spotted outside the gates, the murmur spread through the ballroom like a gust of wind rustling through autumn leaves. The Duke has arrived. Surely not. He never attends these affairs. Perhaps he intends to choose a bride this season. Or perhaps, whispered Lady Ashcombe slyly, he merely wishes to remind us all of his power. At the far end of the ballroom, near a marble column entwined with ivy, Evelina Fairfax stood with her aunt, the Dowager Lady Winthrop. She was dressed in a gown of pale silver-blue silk, simple in its design yet striking in how it complemented her slender figure and delicate complexion. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, a single pearl comb holding it in place. Evelina's gloved hands were clasped in front of her, more from habit than composure. She had never been one for grand assemblies. Though raised in a respectable household, she possessed none of the practiced ease that other young ladies wore like a second skin. Her aunt had spent weeks instructing her in the proper curtsy, the precise angle of her chin, the art of polite laughter. But as the orchestra tuned their instruments and the crowd's anticipation swelled, Evelina felt like a porcelain doll placed upon a mantelpiece, watched, but untouched. Then, the crowd parted. Alexander entered with the unhurried authority of a man who had never needed to seek attention. It simply bent towards him. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair was impeccably styled, his black tailcoat cut to perfection. He wore no excessive jewelry save for the signet ring of his house, which glimmered faintly under the chandeliers. His gray eyes surveyed the room with an expression neither warm nor cold, but deeply measured. Conversations faltered as he passed. Evelina's aunt leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "Do not stare, child. You look like a goose waiting for crumbs." I wasn't," Evelina whispered, though her gaze had indeed lingered a moment too long. "That man," Lady Winthrop continued, eyes narrowed, "has been the subject of every matchmaking mother's schemes for 5 seasons. If he so much as breathes in your direction, you will smile." Graciously. "Yes, aunt," Evelina murmured. The Duke's arrival was soon followed by the opening of the ball. The Duchess of Harrowden, regal in plum velvet, clapped her hands, and the orchestra began the strains of a formal waltz. It was tradition for the Duke of Greystone, as the highest-ranking unmarried gentleman present, to open the dance. But no one expected, however, was whom he would choose as his partner. Alexander's measured steps took him straight through the sea of lords and ladies, bypassing the most eager debutantes, Lady Beatrice with her diamond tiara, Miss Abernathy with her practiced coyness, and stopped directly before Evelina. A ripple ran through the crowd like the tremor before a storm. Evelina froze. Her aunt's fan snapped shut so sharply it startled the gentleman beside her. The Duke bowed with perfect precision. "Miss Fairfax," he said in a voice low and controlled, "would you grant me the honor of the first waltz?" For a moment, Evelina thought she must have misheard. Her name? From the Duke? In such a crowd? Her mind scrambled through every etiquette lesson she'd ever endured. Her aunt's discreet nudge brought her back. "Ah, yes, your grace," she managed, dipping into a curtsy that she hoped did not appear as shaky as it felt. His gloved hand extended, and she placed her own into it, feeling the faint pressure of his fingers as he led her toward the center of the ballroom. The orchestra swelled, and the dance began. The Duke's movements were flawlessly precise, almost mechanical in their perfection. Evelina followed as best she could, grateful for the countless hours spent practicing under her aunt's hawk-like gaze. But as they turned, step by elegant step, She became acutely aware of the weight of every eye in the room. Whispered speculations fluttered around them like moths to a flame. "Who is she, Miss Fairfax?" "From Hampshire, I believe. He's never danced with anyone before. Perhaps she's his intended." Evelina's heart pounded beneath her silk bodice. She dared not look up at his face for too long, yet every time their eyes met briefly, she found no trace of mockery there, only a quiet, inscrutable intensity. "You dance well, Miss Fairfax," Alexander remarked softly, his gaze fixed ahead. "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady, "though I fear my nerves may betray me before the night is through." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You hide it admirably." As the waltz carried on, the world around Evelina began to blur into a swirl of silk and candlelight. The murmuring voices faded into the gentle rhythm of the music, and for the first time that evening, she felt something unfamiliar stir within her, a quiet exhilaration. Though she had danced in assemblies before, never had she done so under the gaze of every eye in London society, and never with a man whose very presence commanded the air. Alexander guided her with measured precision, yet there was no roughness in his movements. His touch was firm, deliberate, as though each step was weighed before being taken. Evelina noticed the faint scent of cedar, and something darker like rain on cold stone that lingered about him. It was a scent she knew she would not soon forget. "Tell me, Miss Fairfax," the Duke said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "do you often attend such gatherings?" Evelina hesitated. There was no flirtatious glimmer in his tone, no idle courtly banter. His question felt genuine. "Rarely, Your Grace. This is my first London season." "Ah," he replied, his expression unchanged. "Then you are unacquainted with the peculiar sport that occurs in rooms such as these." "Sport, Your Grace?" she asked, almost amused. "Indeed," he said, turning them smoothly through the crowd. "Observe the way every smile masks calculation, every compliment conceals ambition. This room is a chessboard, Miss Fairfax, and every person within it a piece moved by either desire or fear." His words sent a small shiver through her. "And what piece am I, then?" she dared to ask. "That," he replied, glancing down at her with eyes as unreadable as a winter sky, "remains to be seen." Their turn brought them dangerously close to the circle of ladies clustered near the orchestra. Among them, Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, the unofficial queen of the season, watched with the fixed smile of a woman whose plans had been most inconveniently disrupted. Her gown of scarlet silk shimmered like a warning flare, her diamonds caught every flicker of light. "Miss Fairfax," Lady Beatrice called sweetly during a pause in the music, "you dance beautifully. How fortunate you are to have caught His Grace's attention this evening." Evelina inclined her head politely. "You are kind, Lady Beatrice." "Oh, I am nothing if not kind," Beatrice replied, the sharpness beneath her words evident to all but the dullest ear. "I dare say the Duke enjoys novelty." The insinuation hung in the air like a blade. Several ladies tittered behind their fans. Evelina felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could reply, Alexander's voice cut through the air with quiet authority. "Lady Beatrice," he said evenly, "I do not recall asking for commentary on my preferences." The hush that followed was instantaneous. Beatrice's smile faltered, just slightly. Evelina's heart thudded in her chest. She had not expected his defense nor the subtle edge of protectiveness in his tone. The music resumed, and Alexander led her away without further glance toward the cluster of ladies. "I fear I have made you a target," he said after a moment. "I suspect I was already one the moment you approached me," Evelina answered with quiet honesty. He looked down at her, and for the briefest instant, something almost like admiration flickered across his features. The final notes of the waltz echoed through the ballroom, drawing the dance to its close. As was custom, Alexander bowed deeply, and Evelina curtsied in return. Polite applause rippled across the room. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Fairfax," he said, offering his arm to escort her back to her aunt. "And I thank you, Your Grace," she replied, still breathless from both the dance and the weight of the evening. As they crossed the ballroom, Evelina felt the weight of countless gazes trail behind them. She could hear fragments of whispers. "Who is she? Why her? Did you see the way he looked at her?" Each murmur pressed against her like invisible hands, and yet beneath it all there was an unfamiliar steadiness growing within her. At her aunt's side, Alexander released her hand. "Lady Winthrop," he said with impeccable courtesy, "you have raised a niece of rare composure. I thank you for the pleasure of her company." Lady Winthrop, who had nearly choked on her champagne when the Duke approached earlier, managed a dignified nod. "Your Grace honors us." Alexander inclined his head, then disappeared into the throng of gentlemen near the card-room, his tall figure quickly swallowed by the sea of silk and velvet. Evelina exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. "Well," her aunt said, her eyes sharp with intrigue, "you have certainly managed to attract the attention of half of London and, more dangerously, that of the Duke of Greystone himself." "I did not manage anything," Evelina protested softly. "He chose the dance." "I merely followed." "Precisely," her aunt replied, tapping her fan against her palm. "And therein lies the trouble. A choice such as his is never without purpose." Evelina's gaze wandered toward the doorway where the Duke had vanished. She knew little of his history beyond what gossip supplied, that he was wealthy, powerful, reserved to the point of severity, and by all accounts disinterested in the games of courtship. Why then had he chosen her? The night carried on with lively music and endless chatter, yet Evelina found herself watching the shadows at the edges of the ballroom. A part of her, a quiet, treacherous part, wondered whether their dance had been a mere curiosity for him, or the first move in a game she did not yet understand. And somewhere in those same shadows, Alexander watched her as well. His expression gave nothing away, but his thoughts were far from idle. The girl had danced without faltering, endured Beatrice's venom with grace, and met his gaze without shrinking. He had not expected that. "Interesting," he murmured to himself, before turning toward the card-room, where his plans for the season were already beginning to shift. The ballroom grew no less brilliant as the hours passed, if anything. Its splendor deepened with the night. Candles burned lower, casting a softer, golden haze upon the guests, while the musicians, encouraged by generous coin, played livelier tunes. But for Evelina, the room had begun to close in. The press of bodies, the endless chatter, the curious gazes that seemed to follow her wherever she turned. It was all too much. Her dance with the Duke had not only placed her in the center of the evening spectacle, but it had also shifted her world in ways she could scarcely understand. "Stand straight, child," her aunt whispered sharply, adjusting the fall of Evelina's sash. "Everyone is watching. You must not give them cause to think you overwhelmed." "I only wish for some air, aunt," Evelina replied softly. "Air?" Lady Winthrop arched a brow. "You are not here to breathe. You are here to be seen. Remember that." Yet, even her aunt could not keep her confined forever. When a fresh set began, and the crowd's attention momentarily scattered, Evelina slipped quietly toward the tall French doors that opened onto the terrace. A rush of cold winter air met her as she stepped outside, its sharpness clearing her thoughts. The gardens of Ashbourne Hall stretched elegantly beyond the terrace, manicured hedges, frozen fountains, and winding gravel paths lit by lanterns that flickered like timid stars. The muffled hum of the ballroom reached her ears but softened with each step she took down the stone stairs. Her slippers crunched lightly on the frosted path. For a moment she stood still, her hands clasped in front of her, gazing at the distant dark hedgerows. She let herself breathe. "I wondered if you would flee." The voice came from behind her, calm, low, and unmistakable. Evelina turned quickly. Alexander, Duke of Greystone, stood a few paces away, his black cloak thrown loosely over his shoulders. The soft light of the lanterns outlined his tall figure against the night. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying instinctively. "I did not expect to find anyone here," he finished for her, approaching slowly. "Nor did I. Yet here we are." He stopped beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, and looked out over the gardens. For a time, neither spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence, rather. It was the sort that allowed thoughts to settle into words. "You seem ill at ease in such gatherings," he said at last, his gaze fixed ahead. "I fear I am not accustomed to being at the center of attention," she replied honestly. "The ballroom is full of eyes." "Yes," he murmured. "Eyes that observe, calculate, and rarely forget. They will speak of this night for weeks." Evelina glanced at him in surprise. "Because you chose to dance with me?" "Because I chose to dance at all," he answered plainly. "And because I did so with someone who was not Lady Beatrice, or one of the usual favorites? She lowered her gaze. Then I have unintentionally drawn your scrutiny upon myself. I did not mean to. He turned to face her fully now, his expression softened by the lantern light. You did nothing. The choice was mine. You merely accepted an invitation with grace. Evelina's cheeks warmed, despite the cold air. There was a directness in his manner that was neither flirtatious nor cold, but deeply sincere, and all the more unsettling for it. May I ask, Your Grace, she ventured cautiously, why you chose me? For a moment, he said nothing. Then, because you were not watching me like the others. She blinked. Pardon? Every pair of eyes in that room was fixed upon me the moment I entered, he said evenly. Except yours. You stood still, observing, calm. That caught my attention. Evelina was at a loss for words. I had not realized. Most do not, he replied, a faint trace of amusement ghosting his lips. It is a rare thing to encounter someone who is neither grasping nor afraid. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching voices drifted from the terrace. Two young gentlemen emerged, laughing too loudly for the hour, their boots clattering against the stone. Upon spotting the Duke and Evelina together, their laughter ceased as abruptly as if struck down by a conductor's baton. They bowed stiffly. Your Grace. Miss Fairfax, one of them murmured, eyes glinting with the thrill of gossip already forming. Alexander inclined his head with the cool authority of one unused to explaining himself. Evelina, however, felt heat rising again. She could almost hear what they would say once they returned inside. It appears, Alexander said quietly, once they had gone, that we have given them new material to discuss. I am sorry, Evelina blurted, though she hardly knew why. Do not apologize, he said firmly. They would gossip if we stood on opposite sides of the garden. Their sport does not concern me. They began to walk slowly along the lantern-lit path, their steps unhurried. You are different, Miss Fairfax, he said suddenly, his tone thoughtful rather than complimentary. I cannot yet decide whether that difference is a strength or a danger. I assure you, Your Grace, she replied, attempting lightness. I am of no danger to anyone. Perhaps not, he said, though his eyes lingered on her with quiet curiosity. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at Evelina's shawl. Before she could adjust it, Alexander reached forward and, with careful precision, drew it more securely over her shoulders. His touch did not linger, but the gesture itself sent a quiet flutter through her chest. The night grows colder, he said simply. You should not remain here too long, or your aunt will accuse me of endangering your health. She laughed softly, the first real laugh of the evening. She might accuse you of far worse if gossip reaches her before I return. Then perhaps, he said, offering his arm with quiet formality, we should return together. It will give them less to invent. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her gloved hand lightly upon his arm. They walked back toward the terrace side by side, lantern light glimmering softly on their silhouettes. The Duke and the young woman who had, unknowingly, shifted the rhythm of the season with a single waltz. As they re-entered the ballroom, conversations paused once again. Lady Beatrice's sharp eyes followed their return like a hawk tracking prey. Her smile was as lovely as ever, and twice as dangerous. Evelina felt the weight of the night settle upon her shoulders once more, but this time, something within her had changed. She could no longer dismiss the encounter as mere happenstance. The Duke's words lingered in her mind like a quietly struck bell, and somewhere across the room, Alexander observed her anew, not as a passing curiosity, but as a question he suddenly found himself intent on answering. The evening of the Highwood Ball arrived with an air of such festivity that even the cold breath of winter seemed reluctant to intrude upon it. Highwood Manor, bathed in golden light, stood proudly against the indigo sky, its windows aglow like 100 watchful eyes. Carriages lined the long gravel driveway, their wheels crunching rhythmically as footmen in immaculate livery hurried to assist arriving guests. Lady Evelyn Montclair descended the staircase of her aunt's townhouse like a vision plucked from a dream. Draped in a gown of soft ivory satin with delicate embroidery of silver thread at the hem, she looked every inch the lady society had expected her to become. Her chestnut hair was gathered into a graceful chignon, adorned with a single pearl comb that caught the light as she moved. Behind her, Aunt Clarissa clasped her hands together in admiration. My dear, she breathed, if the Duke does not notice you this evening, then I dare say he is quite beyond redemption. Evelyn offered a small, controlled smile, the kind expected of a duchess. not a hopeful young woman still wounded by 7 years of indifference. He will notice, she replied softly. But whether it shall mean anything, I cannot say. The ballroom of Highwood Manor was a masterpiece of Regency grandeur. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, casting their warm light across marble floors polished to a mirror's gleam. A string quartet played a lively minuet in the gallery above, and the scent of roses, imported at great cost despite the season, floated on the air. The Duke of Ravenscroft made his entrance fashionably late, as was his habit. A tall, striking figure in a black tailcoat trimmed with silver, his presence immediately commanded the room. Conversations paused, fans fluttered nervously, more than one lady's gaze lingered upon him with undisguised longing. But the Duke's eyes, sharp and discerning, were searching for only one face. And there she was, Evelyn. For a moment, time faltered. Their gazes met across the crowded ballroom, and an unspoken current passed between them. It was not love, not yet, but something far more dangerous, awareness. The Duke's jaw tightened. He had spent 7 years carefully constructing a wall between himself and his wife, and in a single instant, a single glance, a crack had formed. Your Grace, Lord Pembroke greeted him jovially, snapping him back to the present. I had thought you might forego this evening's festivities, as is your custom, and Miss Highwood's rose displays. Perish the thought. The Duke replied smoothly, though his eyes flickered toward Evelyn once more. Lord Pembroke followed his gaze and smirked knowingly. Ah, I see. Perhaps the Duke is finally inclined to dance with his Duchess? The Duke shot him a warning look, but Pembroke only chuckled and excused himself, leaving the Duke to his thoughts. Evelyn, meanwhile, endured the endless chatter of matrons and young ladies eager for gossip. Is it true, Lady Ravenscroft? One simpering Miss Fairchild whispered behind her fan, that the Duke has finally agreed to return to society at your request. Evelyn maintained her composure. The Duke acts of his own will, Miss Fairchild. As do I. Her poise silenced further questions, but her heart thrummed beneath her bodice like a trapped bird. She had told herself she was attending for appearances, for the sake of the family name. But in truth, she wanted something more, not forgiveness, not even love. She wanted recognition. The music shifted. A country dance was announced and couples began pairing off. Evelyn had just declined an eager young gentleman when a familiar voice, low and steady, sounded behind her. May I have this dance, Your Grace? She turned. The Duke stood before her, offering his hand. A collective murmur rippled through the ballroom. The Duke of Ravenscroft asking his Duchess to dance was nothing short of a scandalous miracle. For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. 7 years of silence, distance, and cold civility weighed on her. But the eyes of the room were upon them, and something in the Duke's expression, restrained, yet almost vulnerable, compelled her to place her gloved hand in his. As they took their positions on the dance floor, the murmurs faded. The violins began their lively tune, and Evelyn moved with practiced grace. The Duke matched her step for step, his movements elegant, his gaze unwavering. You surprise me, Your Grace, she said softly as they turned. I have surprised myself, he replied, his voice equally low. I had forgotten the way you light a room. Her breath caught, but she quickly masked it with a composed smile. Flattery, after so many years, is quite unlike you. I do not flatter, he said simply. Not you. They moved closer in the pattern, their hands brushing briefly. A spark, subtle but unmistakable. Evelyn's heart betrayed her, fluttering wildly. Why now? She asked under her breath, eyes fixed on the dance. Because, he answered, I grew tired of watching others see what I refused to. She faltered for the briefest second, her slipper sliding against the polished floor. The Duke's grip tightened, steadying her. Their eyes locked again, and this time neither looked away. After the dance, the couple drew more than polite applause. Whispers followed them like shadows as they retreated to the side of the ballroom. May I offer you refreshment? The Duke asked, his usual cool tone softened. You may, she answered, somewhat taken aback by his civility. As they stood near the refreshment table, the Duke leaned slightly closer. Evelyn, he said, not as a title but as her name. I do not expect forgiveness, but perhaps we might begin anew. Her pulse quickened. 7 years cannot be undone by a single dance, she replied quietly. No, he admitted. but perhaps by many. Before she could respond, Lord Pembroke appeared again, mischief in his grin. "Ah, there you two are," causing quite the sensation. Who would have thought the Duke and Duchess might actually like each other? Evelyn flushed. The Duke merely raised a brow. "Do not be absurd, Pembroke. We merely danced." "And yet," Pembroke said with a knowing twinkle, "the entire room is aflame with speculation. You've both set society's tongues wagging." Later that night, as the carriages departed and the last strains of music faded, Evelyn found herself gazing at the winter sky from the balcony of her aunt's house. Her heart was in tumult. The Duke's words echoed in her mind. Perhaps we might begin anew. She had long ceased to dream of love, yet tonight, for the first time, she wondered if change was possible. And far away, in his grand but lonely manner, the Duke of Ravenscroft stood before the dying embers of his hearth, his thoughts consumed by the look in Evelyn's eyes as they danced, a look that both accused and forgave. For the first time in 7 years he wanted to try. The following afternoon was one of pale winter sun and icy winds sweeping across the bare grounds of Ravenscroft Manor. Within its stone walls, however, the hearths blazed warmly, as though determined to chase away the chill of both season and silence. Evelyn had returned from Highwood Ball with a restless spirit. Sleep had not come easily to her. Every time she closed her eyes, she recalled the Duke's voice as he had spoken her name, not as a courtesy, not as a duty, but as if it truly belonged to him. And now, summoned by his unexpected request, she found herself seated in the grand drawing-room of Ravenscroft, awaiting his arrival. Her gloved hands folded in her lap with perfect composure, though her heart betrayed her with its nervous beating. The Duke entered quietly. He did not wear his usual mask of polished indifference, though his elegance was as impeccable as ever. A dark coat fitted to his frame, his cravat tied with effortless precision, yet something in his manner betrayed unease, as if the fortress he had built around himself these 7 years was not as unshakable as he believed. "Your Grace," Evelyn greeted him, her tone civil but cool. "Evelyn," he returned, deliberately forgoing her title. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire. He approached the hearth, resting one hand upon the mantel as though gathering courage. "You are displeased with me," he said at last. Her lips curved into the faintest, most ironic smile. "You astonish me, sir. 7 years of neglect and distance, and now you perceive displeasure?" The Duke flinched, but did not turn from the fire. "I deserve your censure. I do not deny it." "Then why?" she pressed. "Do you seek my company now? Why request this meeting?" At this, he faced her, and for the first time she saw the shadow of vulnerability in his eyes. "Because," he said, his voice low but firm, "I have been a coward, and I can no longer bear the weight of my own silence." Evelyn's breath caught, though she maintained her composure. "Cowardice? That, I confess, is not the word society most often attaches to you." "Society knows me as a duke," he answered, pacing slowly toward her. "Unyielding, commanding. But my wife knows me as a man, and she knows how I failed her." Evelyn's chin lifted slightly. "You failed me indeed. On our wedding day I was little more than a girl, willing to give everything, believing marriage meant partnership, affection, perhaps even love. And yet I was left to stand alone, a duchess only in name." The pain she had carried for years quivered in her voice. Though she kept her gaze steady, the Duke halted before her, his expression tormented. "I thought distance would protect you, protect me," she repeated, incredulous. "From what, pray tell?" "From myself," he admitted. The words stunned her into silence. He continued, his voice raw, stripped of all society's polish. "There are things in my past, Evelyn, shadows I could not bear to let touch you. I believed if I kept myself apart, I might shield you from the darkness I have carried since my youth. But in so doing, I wronged you more deeply than any shadow ever could." Her gloved hands tightened upon each other. "You speak of shadows and sins, as if they excuse neglect. You denied me companionship, conversation, the simple courtesy of kindness. You did not even try." His eyes, dark and unflinching, met hers. "I tried. By absence. I convinced myself it was noble. Yet watching you last night, radiant, admired by all, I realized my absence was nothing but cruelty disguised as sacrifice." Evelyn rose from her seat, unable to remain composed beneath the weight of his confession. Her gown whispered against the carpet as she moved toward the window, where pale sunlight fell across her figure. "Do you think mere words can undo years of silence?" she asked, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "No," he answered simply, "but perhaps they may begin." She turned then, at last, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. For the first time in 7 years, she saw not the aloof Duke of Ravenscroft, but the man beneath, weary, proud, and desperately uncertain. "What do you ask of me?" she whispered. "Only this," he replied, stepping nearer, though careful not to breach the fragile space between them. "That you allow me the chance to prove myself, not as a duke, not as the man society expects me to be, but as your husband." A silence deeper than any before fell upon the room. Evelyn searched his face for mockery, for insincerity, but found none. Her voice was scarcely audible when she replied, "You speak of beginning anew, yet beginnings are fragile things. Can you promise me, should I grant you such a chance, that you will not retreat once more into your shadows?" His answer was solemn, unyielding. "I promise only that I shall fight them if you will stand with me." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Her heart warred with her reason. 7 years of wounds cried out against forgiveness, yet something undeniable stirred within her. That single confession had opened a door she had thought forever sealed. At last, she inclined her head, her poise unbroken though her voice trembled faintly. "Very well, your grace. I shall permit you this chance. But know this, it is not lightly given, nor easily maintained. If you falter, you shall not find me so willing again." The Duke bowed his head, a shadow of relief flickering across his features. "Fairly spoken, Evelyn. I shall endeavor never to give you cause to regret it." And so, in the quiet of Ravenscroft Manor, with no witnesses but the fire and fading light, a fragile truce was forged, not yet love, not yet forgiveness, but something rare and trembling, the possibility of both. 3 weeks had passed since that quiet winter afternoon in the drawing room of Ravenscroft Manor, 3 weeks in which something delicate, like the first buds of spring, had begun to form between Evelyn and her husband. Their exchanges had softened their silences, no longer held only distance, but possibility. Evelyn had learned to look upon the Duke not merely as the man who had failed her, but as the man who might yet change, and the Duke Alexander had found himself, for the first time in 7 years, deliberately seeking his wife's company. Whether it was a shared breakfast, an unfamiliar ease was growing between them. Yet society, an unfamiliar ease was growing between them. Yet society, ever watchful, was not content to let their fragile peace unfold quietly. And the true test came on the night of the winter assembly at Blackwood Hall. The Blackwood Assembly was one of the grandest affairs of the London season. A night when noble families displayed their daughters, alliances were whispered over glasses of punch, and scandals were born with the ease of candlelight. A luger, and a small orchestra played sprightly country dances that echoed through the hall. Gold candelabras cast their warm glow upon intricate parquet floors, and a small orchestra played sprightly country dances that echoed through the hall. Evelyn entered upon her husband's arm, and for a moment all eyes turned toward them, soft, yet commanding attention through its elegance. A shade chosen deliberately, soft, yet commanding attention through its elegance. A single diamond pendant rested at her throat, a gift from Alexander, presented quietly that morning without explanation. He, too, seemed different that night. His presence was as commanding as ever, but there was a warmth in his gaze when he looked at her, a subtle, silent acknowledgement that did not go unnoticed by the sharp eyes of London society. Whispers began almost immediately. They came together. "The Duchess looks radiant. I heard they have reconciled. Imagine after 7 years." Evelyn held her head high, a serene smile upon her lips. She was determined not to falter, for she knew that every glance, every murmur was a test. And then she appeared. Lady Cassandra Fairfax. Her arrival was like a spark dropped into dry tinder. The tall, striking widow swept into the ballroom in a gown of deep crimson velvet, her dark curls artfully arranged, her smile both calculated and intoxicating. Once, years ago, before Evelyn's marriage had even truly begun, Lady Cassandra had been the Duke's closest companion, whispered to be his confidante, perhaps even something more. When Evelyn had arrived as his bride, Cassandra had departed suddenly for the continent, leaving behind only lingering rumors. And now she had returned. Good heavens, whispered a matron nearby. Lady Fairfax. I thought she would never return to London after, well, you know. Oh, I know, replied another, her fan fluttering eagerly. The Duke will not be able to ignore her. Evelyn's fingers unconsciously tightened around Alexander's arm as Cassandra approached, her smile gleaming like polished steel. Your Grace, Cassandra said, inclining her head toward Alexander with perfect poise. How very unexpected to find you here this evening, and accompanied, no less. Alexander's expression was composed, but a flicker of something crossed his features. Lady Fairfax, it has been some time. Indeed, she said, her eyes sliding deliberately toward Evelyn. And you must be the Duchess. We have never been properly introduced, have we? Evelyn met her gaze coolly. No, though your name is not unfamiliar to me. The corner of Cassandra's mouth curved upward, a smile that held more challenge than warmth. I should think not. Their brief exchange was enough to send a wave of murmurs rippling through the nearby crowd. As the evening progressed, Cassandra made no effort to conceal her attentions toward the Duke. She sought him out during conversations, lingered too long when exchanging pleasantries, and at one point, laughingly reminded him of the summer at Brighton, in a tone clearly meant for Evelyn's ears. Evelyn, to her credit, bore it with dignity. She conversed with the other ladies, danced with polite gentlemen, and did not once allow jealousy to distort her features. But beneath her calm exterior, a tempest brewed. Alexander, meanwhile, seemed caught between the pull of his past and the fragile trust of his present. He was courteous to Cassandra, but not indulgent attentive to Evelyn, but careful, perhaps too careful, to avoid any public scene. And Cassandra, ever the strategist, saw this uncertainty and struck. As the musicians began a waltz, the most intimate of dances, Cassandra approached Alexander with a boldness that made the room hold its breath. Your Grace, she said smoothly, I believe you once promised me the first waltz of the season. Surely you have not forgotten? Evelyn's heart stilled. It was a public challenge. Alexander hesitated, just a heartbeat too long. And in that heartbeat, Evelyn saw it, the shadow of the man who had once chosen silence over her. Around them, whispers swelled like an incoming tide. Will he dance with her? The Duchess is watching. It would be a scandal if he refused Cassandra Fairfax. Cassandra extended her hand, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Society watched, hungry. But then, Alexander spoke. His voice was clear, carrying easily across the murmuring crowd. I fear, Lady Fairfax, he said, bowing with formal grace, that I am already promised the first waltz. He turned and extended his hand to Evelyn. The room fell utterly silent. Evelyn, momentarily taken aback, met his gaze. In his eyes she saw no hesitation now, only certainty. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. As the orchestra struck the first notes, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft moved to the center of the floor. Cassandra's smile faltered, just for an instant, before she masked it with a tinkling laugh and withdrew. The crowd parted around them, and they began to dance. The waltz wrapped around them like a spell. For the first time, Alexander's hand upon her waist was not cold or distant. It was steady, protective, almost reverent. Evelyn's heart, guarded though it was, quickened at the sincerity in his gaze. You hesitated, she whispered under her breath. I remembered, he answered. Then I chose differently. Their movements flowed effortlessly, the music swelling around them, as whispers turned to applause. To society, it was a spectacle, the Duke choosing his Duchess over his past. To Evan it was something quieter, deeper, a moment of undeniable truth. Cassandra watched from the edge of the ballroom, her fan unmoving, her expression perfectly composed, but her eyes, sharp as daggers, followed every step. The game was not over, but Evelyn no longer felt small in her presence. For the first time in 7 years, she felt seen, not by society, but by the man whose name she bore. And Alexander, he understood, perhaps truly for the first time, that his past could no longer dictate his present. The rain arrived without mercy. Thick, relentless sheets pounded against the grand windows of Ashbourne Manor, drowning the gardens in a grey haze. Candles flickered nervously in the drawing room as if they too sensed the storm brewing inside the house. Sarah stood near the fireplace, her gown a soft shade of ivory, now dulled by the shadows cast by the roaring flames. Her hands trembled as she clasped a folded letter. William's handwriting, bold and unmistakable. She had read it countless times since morning, and yet every word pierced her heart anew. I must go, not for myself, but for the honor that binds my name. If fate allows, I shall return. William had left the manor before dawn, riding toward London to face the allegations that threatened his family's name. The whispers of scandal, the supposed forged signatures on trade contracts, the accusation of betrayal to the crown had spread like wildfire through society. Lady Cresswell, ever eager to see William fall, had been the first to circulate the rumors at the Duchess's tea gathering, and now, with the ton already turning their backs, his presence in London was not just necessary. It was dangerous. The door burst open. Emily, Sarah's younger cousin, rushed in, cheeks flushed. "Sarah, the messenger has returned from London. Lord William, he was seen entering the Duke's court at midday. They say the trial is to begin tomorrow." Sarah's breath caught. She pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes glistening. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "And I am here, doing nothing." Emily hesitated. "It isn't proper for you to travel alone to London, especially amidst such talk. You would only worsen the scandal." But propriety had already cost Sarah too much. The weeks of restrained longing, the aching glances across ballroom floors, the stolen conversations in rose gardens, all had led to this moment. She had stood by silently when society judged him. But she would not remain silent now. "I will not let him face this storm alone," she said, her voice steady now. "If his honor is questioned, then so is mine. I belong at his side." Meanwhile, in London, William stood before the Duke's council, his posture rigid, every inch the composed gentleman. But beneath his calm, his mind was ablaze. The evidence had been planted with precision. His closest associates had turned away, and at the heart of the accusation was a single document, a contract bearing his signature, but altered. "Lord Ashbourne," the Duke's voice thundered through the chamber. "You stand accused of treachery against the crown. How do you plead?" William's jaw tightened. "Not guilty, Your Grace, and I intend to prove it." But as he spoke, a strange heaviness filled his chest. For the first time, he was not sure if truth alone would be enough. Society was fickle, power played its own games, and love, though fierce, could be crushed under the weight of public judgment. That night, as carriages lined up outside London's inns, and the rain lashed against the cobblestones, a single carriage departed Ashbourne Manor. Inside, Sarah wrapped herself in a dark cloak, determination blazing in her eyes. The road to London was long and treacherous, but her heart no longer wavered. Whatever awaited them at dawn, they would face it together. London awakened to a gray dawn. The rain had softened into a light mist, veiling the city in a somber, expectant hush. The grand stone courthouse loomed over the square like a silent sentinel. Its marble columns were streaked with damp, its steps crowded with curious onlookers wrapped in shawls and coats. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a restless hive. Lords, ladies, merchants, and gossipmongers filled the benches, eager to witness the downfall or redemption of Lord William Ashbourne. At the center stood William himself, dressed impeccably despite the exhaustion shadowing his eyes. His hands rested calmly on the polished oak table, but beneath the surface, tension coiled like a drawn bowstring. The Duke's council entered with grave faces. "Bring forth the evidence," commanded the presiding judge. A clerk unrolled the forged contract, displaying William's supposed signature to the court. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. The ink was indeed his, but the terms had been altered to imply a betrayal of the crown's trade interests to foreign hands. William stepped forward. "That is my signature, but not my contract. Someone has tampered with it." The judge's brows furrowed. "And do you have proof of such tampering, Lord Ashbourne?" A dangerous silence followed. William opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the courtroom doors swung open with a loud, echoing bang. All heads turned. Sarah entered. Her cloak dripped rainwater onto the stone floor as she strode forward, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing with unshakable resolve. The murmurs grew louder. A woman of noble birth entering a courtroom unaccompanied. Scandalous. But Sarah did not waver. She approached the judge's bench, clutching a leather-bound ledger to her chest. "I do," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I have proof. William froze. Sarah, she glanced at him, and for a moment, the chaos around them faded. Only their eyes spoke, hers, filled with fierce love and determination, his, with astonishment and a flicker of desperate hope. Sarah turned to the judge. This ledger belonged to Mr. Hargrave, the trade accountant. He confided in me, shortly before his sudden disappearance, that someone had forced him to alter Lord Ashbourne's contract. He kept copies hidden in his study. I found them. The judge examined the ledger. The room held its breath. Within its pages were the original agreements, unaltered, with dates and signatures matching William's authentic documents. The clerk compared them to the forged contract. The differences were undeniable. The judge's gavel struck. This evidence is substantial. The accusation appears to be based on fraudulent documents. Lord Ashbourne, you are hereby cleared of all charges. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries of shock, murmurs of admiration. Lady Cresswell's face drained of color as whispers turned against her. William turned toward Sarah. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he crossed the room, heedless of society's eyes, and took her hands in his. You came, he whispered hoarsely. Sarah's eyes softened. Did you truly think I would let you fight alone? He drew her closer, his forehead resting gently against hers, the storm that had raged for weeks finally breaking into calm. Around them, scandal and spectacle melted away. In that moment, it was only them, two souls standing unshaken before the world. The judge cleared his throat pointedly, but the court had already decided the true story. It wasn't merely the evidence that had saved William. It was her courage, their trust, and love that defied every social boundary. Outside, as they stepped onto the courthouse steps, the sun pierced through the mist, bathing the square in soft golden light. A new beginning, born from the storm. The last of winter's chill lingered in the air, mingling with the pale warmth of an early spring morning. Ravenscroft Manor, once wrapped in an oppressive silence, now seemed to breathe again. The sun spilled softly over the stone terrace, catching on the newly blossoming wisteria that clung to the columns. A fresh breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs through the open windows of the drawing room. Sarah stood near the tall French doors, her hands loosely clasped before her. She had been awake since dawn, unable to silence the quiet whirl of thoughts in her mind. The courtroom triumph had restored William's honor, and yet, as the storm faded, a new uncertainty had settled in its wake. For 7 years their marriage had been nothing but a name shared in silence. And now, everything had changed, and yet nothing had been said between them, not truly. She drew a slow breath, her gaze wandering to the gardens where the first blush of spring painted the hedges. Her heart, so accustomed to cautious distance, now fluttered with something both frightening and beautiful. Possibility. A soft knock broke her reverie. Come in, she said gently. William entered. No court robes, no title-bound finery, just a simple dark morning coat and a quiet expression. For once, he looked not like the Duke of Ravenscroft, but simply William. He paused at the threshold, as if uncertain whether to step further. For a man so accustomed to command, that hesitation was new. May I? He asked. Sarah turned fully to him. Of course. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a few steps away. The sunlight fell between them, a golden line neither had crossed in years. I owe you more than I can ever repay, he began, his voice low, steady, but carrying a weight that reached her. For standing by me when I had given you little reason to. For seeing through the noise of society, when even I began to doubt myself. She shook her head. You owe me nothing. What I did, because it was right. Because I knew the man beneath the distance. Even if you never allowed me to know him fully. His eyes lowered briefly, the faintest hint of regret softening his expression. I kept walls where there should have been doors, he admitted. I thought by keeping my heart apart, I was protecting us both. But in truth, I was only building a prison for us. The honesty in his words struck something deep within her. For so long she had waited for him to speak not in grand declarations, but in truth. He stepped closer, the golden line on the floor dissolving between them. Sarah, I cannot undo the years I kept away, but I can be here now, truly here if you will have me. Not as a duke and his duchess, just as a man and woman trying to begin again. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Outside, the breeze stirred the wisteria vines, sending petals drifting like gentle snow. She met his gaze, searching it for doubt but found only sincerity. A slow smile touched her lips, soft and luminous. "I do not ask for promises of eternity," she said quietly. "Only honesty, and a chance to build something real, even if it begins slowly." He exhaled, as if releasing years of unspoken words. "Then slowly it shall be," he murmured. They stood there in silence, not the cold, unyielding silence of their past, but a warm, tentative one, alive with unspoken understanding. After a while, William extended his arm to her in a gesture both simple and deeply intimate. "Would you walk with me? The morning is far too beautiful to spend indoors." Sarah's eyes softened. She slipped her hand through his arm, and together they stepped out onto the terrace. The gardens unfurled before them like a promise. They walked down the gravel path slowly, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. Occasionally, their hands brushed as they walked, not deliberately, but naturally, as if their bodies were learning to be near one another again. They spoke of ordinary things at first, the late frost, the state of the roses, plans for the spring fete. But beneath the surface, each word was a thread, weaving something new between them. As they reached the small stone bridge overlooking the lake, William stopped. The water mirrored the sky, pale blue streaked with soft clouds. He turned to her. "Do you remember the day we first arrived here?" "Ah," Sarah smiled faintly. "I do. I was terrified. And you?" "Barely spoke a word. I was a fool," he said simply. "I mistook duty for distance. I thought silence would make things easier. And now?" she asked softly. He looked out over the lake. "Now I know silence only keeps you from the very thing that might save you." She felt a quiet warmth settle in her chest. Not the dizzying rush of sudden love, but something steadier, like the first light of dawn after a long, bitter night. They walked back slowly as the sun climbed higher, gilding the manor's windows in gold. Servants opened shutters, the household stirring to life, but neither of them hurried. For the first time in years, there was no weight pressing down on her chest, no icy distance, no formal walls. Just the quiet, unfolding beginning of something real. As they reached the terrace again, William paused to look at her. Not as a duke assessing his duchess, but as a man finally seeing the woman before him. Sarah met his gaze without hesitation. "It's a lovely morning," she said. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Yes," he replied. "It is." The breeze lifted, carrying petals across their path, and as the world stirred to life around them, two hearts once estranged by silence began, at last, to speak in the language of quiet beginnings.